I'd like to present the first speaker for Panel 1, Transformations of the Chicago River and Lakefront. Debra Shore is the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Chicago. Debra's long history of work on conservation in the Chicago region includes forging important partnerships with public and private organizations, editorial writing, as well as many advisory and leadership roles in the community and local government. Please welcome Debra Shore.
Good morning, and thank you. I'm going to dial back a little bit in time and try to set the scene for what the rest of the panelists will be talking about. Our water story in this region begins about 15,000 years ago, when where we are now was under a half mile or more of ice, pretty heavy. The last glacier extended this far south and not much farther. And as it begins to recede, it slowly grinds back and forth, scouring the landscape, leaving an enormously rich mix of soils, leaving glacial ridges and moraines, leaving giant ice cubes that as they melt create prairie potholes, and leaving a very great lake. And collectively, the Great Lakes hold nearly 20% of the world's fresh surface water. And unlike fossil fuels, there are no substitutes for fresh water. And this image shows the eastern subcontinental divide, that sort of wavy line down the middle, which happens to be the highest point on the landscape left by the retreat of the glacier. But it separates the Lake Michigan watershed from that of the Mississippi. All the rain falling on the east side of this divide would make its way into rivers and streams and replenish the lake, and on the west side would make its way into rivers and streams and eventually end up in the Mississippi. And you see two smudges, these sort of brown spots at the lake's edge. That's pollution. Because in the mid-1800s, as Chicago was becoming a developed metropolis, people dumped all manner of human and animal and industrial waste directly into the Chicago River, which flowed into the lake, which then and now is a source of drinking water. Not a good idea to put raw sewage into your drinking water, and so understandably, people were getting sick of cholera and typhoid and other waterborne diseases. They kept moving the water intake pipes further out, but storms would push the contamination towards the intakes. And this shows that at the southern end of the lake, there's very little circulation of currents, so that whatever is dumped into the southern end stays there and doesn't get diluted or swept away by the action of currents in Lake Michigan. We had a very busy, industrialized, commercialized lakefront. The river was a path for a lot of boat traffic, and again, contamination. And while the water tower was built in 1853 to help pump water, we didn't have water filtration or treatment with chemicals to purify the water. And indeed, the planners of the Columbian Exposition in 1893 were worried that people wouldn't come because they might get sick from drinking the water. So they made a point of advertising that the water would be filtered at the exposition. Nonetheless, there were two gentlemen, J.D. McDonald and his son Alvin, who were the explorers and developers of Wind Cave in South Dakota, came to promote the cave for tourism at the Columbian Exposition. Alvin contracted typhoid fever and died later that year at age 20 from drinking Chicago's water. So the City planners said, what can we do? We can't have a thriving metropolis if people can't have a safe, secure source of drinking water. And so they came up with the idea of digging a canal between the south branch of the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River to build some locks at the mouth of the Chicago River and to essentially use water from Lake Michigan to flush sewage downstream, to reverse a river. And they founded the Chicago Sanitary District in 1889 with this mission, and they began digging. It took 11 years to dig the Sanitary and Ship Canal. This image shows some of that work. Some of the techniques they used were later used to dig the Panama Canal. It was a magnificent engineering feat, and I'll just run through some historic images of that enterprise. I would submit it allowed Chicago to become a great metropolis because it protected the drinking water source and people could come and have a safe, secure source of water. And yet, I think it also speaks to a boldness, a vision, a kind of human agency and political will. It cost $15 million in 1890 money to dig this canal, and we rarely see that in the public sphere today. The Sanitary and Ship Canal, again, mostly men on the, all men on the Board of Trustees. When I joined the board in 2006, there were 7 women and 2 men, so we have made some changes. So I call this the audacity of slope, the reversal of the Chicago River, even though the difference in elevation from the south branch to where the channel joins the Des Plaines is less than 6 feet. Essentially was an open sewer pipe and a route for commercial barge traffic to travel between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. And it's been said that all problems started as solutions. Remember that. I think it would bode well for us to have a bit of humility. The solution to the problem of Chicago's contaminated drinking water was to dig a canal and reverse a river, and it worked. But that in turn created at least 2 new problems. One was we broke through that natural hydrologic divide separating the Lake Michigan watershed from the Mississippi. And this image shows the Sanitary and Ship Canal in the middle. Later, the North Shore Channel was dug from Wilmette to the north branch of the Chicago River, finished in 1910, again, to use water from the lake to flush sewage from the North Shore and the northern part of the city downstream. And the Cal-Sag Channel, 16 miles, was finished in 1922. And collectively, these are called the Chicago area waterways. No more smudges in the lake. We protected the drinking water, but we created a diversion of water out of Lake Michigan and a conduit for invasive species to move in both directions between the Lake Michigan watershed and the Mississippi, so that today we're worried about invasive species like Asian carp making their way up through the Des Plaines River into Lake Michigan. We became a grand metropolis, so that today it's estimated nearly 42% of Cook County is impervious surface. And what does that mean? It means we have a lot of flooding because we've removed the land's ability to absorb water, and we've given rain nowhere to go. And Chicago is a low-lying, wet, swampy landscape. There's no real downhill to move water away from us. So some of the challenges we're facing have a lot to do with flooding and basement backups. In the late 1960s, the Sanitary District conceived of a deep tunnel, 109 miles in 4 sections, 300 feet underground, to capture stormwater runoff, to reduce pollution in the Chicago waterways. The tunnel was finished in 2006 and can hold 2.5 billion gallons of stormwater runoff and has led to much water quality improvement in the Chicago waterways. And yet we're seeing increasing rainstorms of great intensity, and when the river system fills up, on occasion we still have to open locks and reverse the flow out into the lake instead of away from the lake. This graph shows reversals in some recent years. And this is the increasing precipitation that we're experiencing in our region. So our challenge now is, how do we address the rainfall, the stormwater, the flooding that climate change suggests we will see increasingly, and how do we take these man-made waterways that people now want to use, deserve to use, and are using, and ask ourselves, what do we owe the river, this vital artery threaded through the heart of a great metropolis, and what do we owe the lake? Thank you very much.